Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Kimberly Guilfoyle Show, live on Rumble, where facts come first and where news is done right. And today, I'm remembering my dear friend, Charlie Kirk, and his impactful life. His voice and actions were a powerful testament to the causes we hold dear: free speech, faith, and family. He understood that free speech wasn't just an abstract right, but the very foundation of what it meant to live well, where ideas could be debated, truth could be sought, and how our country could flourish. He was fearless in his defense of this principle, always willing to stand up for the rights of others to speak, even when he disagreed with them. His faith was not just a private matter. It was the foundation from which his strength and conviction flowed. And finally, there was his unwavering commitment to family. He knew that the family unit was the bedrock of a strong community and a healthy society. Charlie leaves a legacy of courage, conviction, and a deep love for this country. We continue to honor his memory by remembering the fight he fought, the words he spoke, and the life that he lived. And it is why we will never stop seeking the truth. Watch this video the White House released earlier today.
Is it possible to say, you know what, I don't like the way the country is going, and to do something about it? Take that risk. Take that leap of faith. Stay involved. Trust God and act obediently. Romans 12:2 verse. That God will use all things for good for those who love him. It's bigger than you. I want you to remember that. It is bigger than you. It's bigger than me. You are here to make somebody else's life better, the pursuit of liberty and freedom. You know what gives me strength? The hundreds of thousands of you that say, Charlie, keep going.
1 Corinthians 5 and 15. So that's all pretty amazing evidence, not just intra-biblical evidence, but extra-biblical evidence that Jesus Christ was a real person. He lived a perfect life. He was crucified, died, and rose on the third day, and he is Lord and God of all.
Charlie's vision is alive and stronger than ever. Prayers are rising, millions of students are rallying, volunteers are flooding in, and vigils are filling churches and schools across the nation. We are going to lift up the next generation, and we are never, ever going to give up. And for all the very latest updates and reflections on Charlie's legacy, we bring in Daily Signal's senior editor and author of Woke to Us, Tyler O'Neill. Tyler, thank you so much for being with us on this commemorative show.
Thanks so much for having me, Kimberly.
I really appreciate it. I know, this is a difficult time. To start, if you could, can you reflect on Charlie's impact and on his legacy?
Yeah, I think Charlie last week became a martyr for free speech. He was sitting there, as he did so many times, countless times, at a booth, taking questions, responding with reasoned arguments to the left, and really setting them straight, in my view. And the thing he said he wanted to be remembered for is his courage for his Christian faith. And that speaks volumes. I've been seeing across social media, I mean, there's some really, really horrible responses to Charlie's death, but there's also a lot of really encouraging messages. I see people say, I've never darkened the doorstep of a church, and yet I want to do that because that's what Charlie Kirk would have wanted me to do. And, last night I heard Robert F. Kennedy Jr. get up at a vigil for Charlie Kirk and say, my niece is going off to college and she packed a Bible. And her mother was confused about this, but when her mother asked her, she said, Mom, I want to live like Charlie Kirk. And that means delving into my faith, reading the scripture, and opening my heart to the word of God. I mean, she didn't say it that way, but she did say that means taking a Bible with her. And I think Charlie's witness has reverberations across the country and across the world for the truth of the gospel, for what it means to be a conservative, responding to the left's vitriol with reasoned debate and arguments. And I think the best thing that's come out of this is the way that conservatives are doubling down on speaking the truth and making arguments and, against all the evil that we've seen, against that evil man firing a bullet into the neck of Charlie Kirk. The response is faith, reason, debate, and trying to convince the other side, because that is the way that we move forward.
A lot of your work obviously reaches young people. How was Charlie so effective at that and connecting and making such a significant impact? And what did you learn from his work?
Well, I think in the days of social media, where everybody has a platform, you're creating this cultivated image of yourself. Charlie Kirk was authentic. And so many people saw that. I mean, he was the guy who would sit behind a desk and say a statement that many people might think is controversial, but say, prove me wrong. And he legitimately meant that. He wanted to hear what the other side said, and he wanted to engage, and he would listen, and then he would respond. And, not everybody would agree with his responses, but that's okay. That was the goal he was seeking here, is to have Socratic dialogue that moves us together as a society and really speaks to young people. And I think young people today are really buffeted by not just competing worldviews, but also by big social struggles that they don't know what the future is going to look like. And they want a voice that isn't packaged, that isn't constantly pushing that woke narrative that they hear day in and day out. And when they hear Charlie Kirk, a lot of people, at first they think, oh, he's going to be radical, he's going to be weird, he's going to be off to the right. And they go in and hear him, and they see this very friendly guy. I mean, they used to hear him, but I think many clips are coming out now that are constantly showing who Charlie Kirk was. And these people saw, this is a friendly guy who engaged in reasoned debate. I remember I was at a journalism conference, and there were people talking about how the evils of the right, the way that the right is organized, and they want to empower other liberal journalists to expose the nefarious impact of the right. And this woman had written a book about Charlie Kirk, but she came up there and said, a lot of people think Charlie Kirk is cynical, that he's taking advantage of people. I don't think so. She said he's a real believer. And that authenticity, that spoke volumes. And that's one of the things that really resonated with young people today, because people know when they're being lied to. And Charlie Kirk was not lying to them. He was bringing them the unvarnished truth.
Yeah.
And he ultimately paid for it with his life.
So upsetting even to think about it. How have you found, personal inspiration, or how do you think this is affecting or motivating patriotic Americans across this country? I know that you mentioned faith. What role can faith play also, in the public square and on campus?
No, I think Charlie's faith and Charlie's reasoned argument. The main thing, a lot of people are using the term martyr. I think Charlie Kirk was a martyr. He was a martyr for free speech. He was also a very outspoken Christian man who stood by his faith. But the way he's going to be remembered in this country, and needs to be remembered, is as a man who fought for free speech, engaged people in reasoned argument, and ultimately was killed because he's focused on Socratic dialogue. I mean, this is very much an incident like the death of Socrates, like the death of Martin Luther King Jr. It opens our eyes to a threat to something that we all cherish. And so we need to remember Charlie Kirk so much. I've been inspired. I was inspired by Charlie's arguments for a long time. And in fact, my wife volunteered with him at one instance of the Conservative Political Action Conference years ago. And so she had a personal relationship, and she was just breaking down. I mean, this really hit our family really hard.
Very hard, yes.
Because my children are 2 and 6. And to see Charlie Kirk's little toddler, I mean, that
terrible
footage of the little girl running and throwing her arms around her dad, I mean, that's that's where I am with my kids. And the fact that these kids are going to grow up without a father, I mean, he's such a tremendous figure, but they won't have their father growing up, and that's something they can't get back. And as a father, that's one of the most horrifying things about this whole situation.
No, really, yeah, it just gut wrenching. You cover religious liberty extensively. Charlie brought more and more young people to reject the environment we've seen on campus that downplays faith and downplays free speech. What's the mission ahead of us, and what does it look like?
Yeah, I think the mission is to continue what Charlie did and to increase it. So we've seen new Turning Point USA chapters springing up across the country. And we see, I hesitate to say this because I think of a revival as the church returning to what God really wants it to look like. But we see seeds and, signs of a potential revival in this country. And the more people come to Jesus out of this, come to God, even if they don't believe the gospel, which I encourage everyone who is listening to pick up a Bible, read John 16, know that we as human beings, we're made in God's image, and yet we sinned and we are separated from God, but we can be brought back to God. Every longing in your heart, there's a longing in your heart for something that things in this world can't satisfy. There's a reason why everything we succeed at in life, every good thing we get, we always want a little bit more. We want something that this world can't give us. And that seed of longing speaks to the satisfaction that only God can give us. And so I would encourage everyone, if you don't have a personal relationship with Jesus, to, prayerfully consider and ask God to reveal himself to you. And if you're skeptical about this, I don't blame you. People come from many different places. But I do believe that God came down from heaven and became a little baby on Christmas and then, he humbled himself and taught us how to humble ourselves. And he submitted obediently to the will of his Father, even to death, was crucified in one of the most gruesome ways a person can be put to death. But that death paid for your sin and mine and enabled us to accept his free gift of eternal life. And Jesus rose again on the third day, showing that he was not just any other criminal put to death, but that he was the Son of God, giving us hope of our own ultimate resurrection. And the fact that at the end of all things, we will be judged. And if we are judged on what we do, we have no hope. But if we are judged, if the blood of the Lamb washes us, we have a chance to have immeasurable blessing in heaven. And I pray for everyone who is watching this, for everyone who hasn't heard that message, that you would open your hearts to the possibility that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and that you would come to that knowledge, because the riches of God's grace are unspeakable. And it is that only God can save us from what seems to me an increasing battle between the right and the left, that, as more of these attacks happen, I'm really, really concerned that our country is reaching a breaking point. But with God's grace, hopefully the better angels of our nature can prevail, and we can come through reasoned debate, through prayer, through humility. We can actually resolve our differences with one another, and peacefully, not by silencing each other at the end of a gun.
I agree. And I've traveled the whole country with Charlie. He's one of my closest best friends, and I've known him since he was like 18 years of age. And he was such a bright star and a talent. Put him on air a lot at Fox. His wife, Erica, is a friend of mine. Remember being with him on the night that he was going on his first date, which is so sweet. Yeah, and we're like, yeah, you should just marry her. She's amazing. And she, and then there you go. And they had such a happy, beautiful marriage, two amazing, kids. And I think the whole world was grieving with her and for her children, just during this very, very difficult time. I really feel that, Charlie Kirk was on a path that, he could have been U.S. president one day. And there's a little baby running to him. Oh my gosh, that's what it breaks everyone's heart to even just see that. But that was one of the moments that you see the joy and love he had in his heart for his, his children. And he already had a big impact. It did not take him dying at the hands of an assassin. He was already making such a massive change in this country with young people focusing on having families, focusing on having children, focusing on getting back in church. And we saw this over the past weekend on Sunday that so many people were reporting and sending photos of their churches being packed, parking out on the grass because the parking lot was overflowing. So sort of a rebirth of religion and religious liberty, which I know you care deeply about.
Yeah. Those packed churches speak volumes to the real legacy that Charlie had. And you mentioned he could have been president one day. I think that's very true. But what he achieved in his life, and unfortunately, the horrific nature in which he died, I think he'll have more impact than some presidents in our history have. And we'll be talking about him like we talk about Martin Luther King Jr., I think. I mean, this man built a movement, and that movement is continuing. It's not over. I think it's, and this is, I don't want to go too much into divisiveness here, but that movement, he started Turning Point USA. That became the largest conservative grassroots youth organization in the country. And then one of the worst organizations, in my opinion, the Southern Poverty Law Center, had the gall to put Turning Point USA on a map with Klan chapters,
So
suggesting
crazy.
that there's white supremacism. And then we had this. And I think it is long past time that particular organization remove Turning Point USA from the hate map. There are many other groups that it has to remove. But I think in the wake of this huge historic moment, the fact that they haven't removed Turning Point is damning. And we need to continue to demand that they do that.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I appreciate you bringing that point up. And I want to delve a little bit, as far as the investigation goes. We're told now that the FBI is investigating several different left-wing groups that are based in Salt Lake City, which actually appears to be a hotbed for some of this extremism. We see our FBI Director, Kash Patel, there discussing this. What has your own work uncovered about how some of these groups operate and their agenda?
Yeah, so I've been focused generally nationally on the organizations, particularly that staffed and advised the Biden administration and the network that propped them up, what I call the left's dark money network. And this is a network of donors who often hide the way that they send their money to prop up these organizations. And then these organizations influenced policy in the Biden administration. But some of them have also had really disturbing ties to some of these protests that turn into riots, particularly opposing ICE, opposing the enforcement of immigration law. And this raises a lot of concerns. I mean, how much do organizations that fund the left, parts of the left's dark money network, do these groups really vet where their money is going? And if they oppose political violence, as they say they do, are they doing everything they can in their due diligence to prevent their money from propping up political violence? And these are questions that have to be addressed, that have to be looked into. Because, I talk about the Southern Poverty Law Center a lot because I've been focused on them. I think they're the tip of the spear in undermining religious freedom and free speech of conservatives in America. And they have constantly carried water for Antifa, for this violent movement that engaged in attacks on law enforcement, that engaged in attacks on, you know, federal buildings, and everyday citizens, everyday businesses were burned down to the ground in the 2020 George Floyd riots. And that doesn't mean everybody involved in the Black Lives Matter movement is responsible, but there are many organizations that were propping up these protests, and the protests led into violence. At some point, it's very clear that these groups were organized. They had shields with Black Lives Matter on them, with Antifa slogans, going after people, engaging in violence, throwing Molotov cocktails. This is a real threat. And I'm glad to see that under President Trump, we have an FBI that's willing to investigate this.
That's really true. And you see these groups that have deleted their Instagram accounts and just a lot of very disturbing things. And I know you've written about several organizations that have been eager to, label, as you discussed earlier, conservative groups as hate groups, but oftentimes left-wing organizations, they get a pass. There's just a complete double standard. What has your book and your work in particular uncovered?
Yeah, thank you. That main issue with the Southern Poverty Law Center overlooking Antifa violence,
yes,
overlooking Black Lives Matter, not including, and they have a new category. They have anti-government extremist groups that they put on the hate map, and they've put Moms for Liberty under that banner.
So crazy.
And they don't put actual groups that organize attacks on federal law enforcement buildings under that banner. So if you oppose teachers pushing critical race theory and gender ideology on kids in opposition to parental rights, you're on the hate map with chapters of the Klan. But if you engage in violent attacks on federal law enforcement or on, everyday homes and businesses that were burned down in these riots, and you're calling for systemic change and engaging in violence, you're nowhere on the hate map. You're not even listed as an anti-government extremist group. So I think it is long past time we send the message that nobody should be relying on the Southern Poverty Law Center when it comes to hate. Exactly. And we should also be looking very critically at groups like the Anti-Defamation League, which has rightly called out a lot of violence against Jews and anti-Semitism, but is often engaged in some of the same strategic misrepresentation of facts that allows people to say, oh, all the violence comes from the right and it never comes from the left. Because you hear this talking point over and over again, but you ask, like you mentioned specific people, like the Nashville shooter who identified as transgender. Like so many of these people who are identifying as transgender are mentally unstable, engage in violence from a left-wing perspective. And the ADL and the SPLC and other groups try to find any excuse to say they're not left-wing violence. Meanwhile, anybody who once wrote something, that they say is racist and engaged in that violence, and oftentimes this is really disgusting stuff that nobody on the right stands for, and conservatives over and over condemn. Yet they say, oh no, this person is a conservative, is a member of the right. The right needs to own this. Meanwhile, they're constantly saying, oh, the left is let off the hook. And that double standard is part of what's making things worse in this country. We are lying about the real threats here. And thank God we have President Trump in the White House. We have people who are looking at this, trying to correct some of that really horrible bias that we saw from the last administration. But it's a long hill. It's an uphill battle. And I think we need to be patient and see where the truth is. I mean, I'm dedicated to truth here. I want to know what the motivation is behind each of these shooters. And I want people on the left to condemn this, to remove Turning Point from the hate map, for crying out loud. But I want us to have a civil debate and to be able to engage and move forward on issues. And over again, we see the left trying to silence the right and use any excuse it can to do so. And my goal has long been to blast those narratives, to explain why they're lies. And that's why I think the Southern Poverty Law Center is the center and nexus of this, because they've proven over and over and over again how extreme the left is, how much they'll carry water for violent Antifa attackers while ignoring the real threats.
Terrible.
And they'll always say the right is the real threat. And I'm sorry. I mean, there are bad people on the right, but that doesn't mean most or all conservatives think a certain way. And it also is not in alignment with what the right stands for. That's the main thing. We stand for God. We stand for the Constitution. We stand for religious freedom for everyone. And we oppose things like gender ideology, critical race theory, climate alarmism, and a preference for technocratic government. We want an America that is strong and able to fight for our freedoms. And we believe that America is fundamentally good. I think that's one of the main things that separates the right and the left right now, is we believe that America is good and that we need to follow the good heritage that we have and implement that. And that doesn't mean America is sinless. We have had our problems, and thank God we worked through them. But fundamentally, America is a force for good in the world, and the world will look better if America is stronger, if we have freer markets, if we have stronger families,
Yes.
and if we return to the truths that founded our country.
You know, how many layers are there, Tyler, to these funding networks? It's quite interesting. Inside groups like the SPLC, and how many different groups are part of that apparatus?
It's humongous. And I mean, I've come on your show before and showed my chart, which is mind-boggling.
The big, beautiful chart?
The ones that we know about. I don't have it physically right now, but it has 4 different levels of this influence network. And it talks about the funding streams, the activist groups, and then ultimately, which parts of the federal government they were manipulating. And all of this is only the stuff that I was able to prove. I mean, there is more out there that is yet to be discovered. And so when we're talking about the Left's Dark Money Network, the groups I talk about are organizations like Arabella Advisors. And I've got to be careful because these groups are very, litigious. And I also just want to be as accurate as I can.
Sure.
But Arabella Advisors is a for-profit company that provides various services to many nonprofit organizations on the left that then prop up projects that donors can give to these nonprofits, and the money gets cloaked and redirected to these projects, so the donors don't have hands on the projects that they're funding. And so this is the quintessential, this is what makes it dark money. Now I think this sort of action, I'm going to say this very clearly because I think it's important to say, there is nothing inherently illegal about this. This is something that the right and the left both engage in, but the left engages in it more than the right. But people like Sheldon Whitehouse, the esteemed senator from Rhode Island, constantly say that dark money is only on the right and we need to get rid of all dark money. That's wrong. And it's also fundamentally a lie. When you look at dark money, that just means we as Americans have the right to give to organizations we believe in without disclosing our identity. And I think that's an important First Amendment right that we have. But what happens on the left is you get all of this funding, they cloak where it goes, they prop up these organizations, and then they promote these radical ideologies, and they push them through the federal government. That was the focus of my book. They also push them through civil society, and they cover for left-wing violence sometimes. I mean, they covered the Southern Poverty Law Center constantly ignoring the left-wing violence. But this apparatus has tremendous impact on what we as Americans see. And if you're not engaged in politics, you are influenced by this in ways that you don't really understand. And so our academia, our Hollywood, like many places that influence our culture, it's not just the federal government, that is being manipulated essentially by all of this money, by all of this influence, by these ideas that are setting us against one another and painting America as evil. And so what we have to do is be very aware of this. And I mean, President Trump has said, he's finally cut off federal grants to some of these organizations. The Left's Dark Money Network is on the back foot right now because a lot of the federal money that they used to receive is dried up, is cut away. I think that's good. I mean, it's also good for these organizations as organizations. It's great for the taxpayer. It's great for America that these groups are not, being given our money and propping up what I believe to be evil ideologies with our money. But these nonprofits, they proliferate. And so you have hundreds of organizations that will sign a letter. And you get this phenomenon where, and many of these are connected through the Left's Dark Money Network, where you have 100 liberal organizations, and they don't say they're liberal, but they're all liberal organizations that are funded by the same people, and they're all sending a message like, oh, Trump's enforcement of immigration law is racist and evil and all this stuff. And these letters, they come out and they're meant to look like they're serious, like there's a huge movement behind them, when in reality, it's just a whole bunch of these groups that are propped up by the Left's Dark Money Network, and in some cases by your tax dollars. And now that money is being pulled back. Those groups are starting to have to face the market and realize that there is, in nonprofits, just as in the for-profit world, you should only be able to make money if you actually provide a service and do something good. And there's been so much money from the government, from other places, propping up people that shouldn't be propped up. And so you're starting to see a lot of these groups that are arguably duplicative starting to fold, starting to downsize, and everyone on the left acts as though this is the end of the world. But in reality, this is a culling, and this is like the free market finally joining there. And on the right, organizations rise and fall a lot. I mean, Turning Point started super small, but there's another organization I know of personally called Generation Opportunity, which started to do a lot of the same things that Turning Point was aiming to do. And around the same time, both of those groups got started. Generation Opportunity is no longer around. Turning Point USA has achieved so much that Charlie Kirk was larger than life and is larger than life even now. And so what we see is, the right has to work hard, earn donors' money, and the left is now starting to have to work hard. And we'll see what ends up happening. But I'm really glad to see an administration that is willing to take these things seriously, to look at the left-wing groups that might be propping up this violence, and to pull money back from these activist groups that shouldn't be receiving our tax dollars in the first place.
No, you're right about that, and I really appreciate the dedication, by which you approach your work and your research. It's highly informative, it's insightful, it's necessary to really understand exactly what's going on in this country, and we saw it at play with the horrific assassination of Charlie Kirk. But I do want to thank you, Tyler, for spending the time with me today and with our amazing viewers during this very difficult time. We appreciate your thoughts and keeping you and your family in my prayers.
Thank you so much again for having me and
Always
for
a
those
pleasure.
prayers. They really do make a difference.
They really do. God bless, they do. All right, my friend, thank you so much. And make sure you follow him, check him out. He's brilliant, an amazing author, and go get his books as well. And I encourage everyone to keep following outlets like the Daily Signal. Keep encouraging the next generation to rise up and to keep putting faith and family at the center of your life. Charlie built this movement, and now it is our responsibility to carry the torch, to meet the moment, to rise to the occasion, and to never, ever stop seeking the truth. And to all of us who knew him as a dear friend, we will never forget just how incredible he was, and we will continue praying and supporting his beautiful family. And I want to close out the show with remarks from the Vice President earlier today, who actually hosted Charlie's show here on Rumble. Thank you for spending this important time with us today. Let us pray for a bolder and a brighter future in faith with God. God bless.
Hey everybody, JD Vance here, live from my office in the White House complex and filling in for somebody who cannot be filled in for, but I'm going to try to do my best, my dear friend, the great Charlie Kirk. The last several days have been extremely hard for our country. They've been hard for me, hard for my family, hard for the countless people in this building who knew and loved Charlie Kirk, and of course, they've been hardest most of all for his darling wife, Erica, and their two beautiful children. The thing is, every single person in this building, we owe something to Charlie. He was a joyful warrior for our country. He loved America. He devoted himself tirelessly to making our country a better place. He was a critical part of getting Donald Trump elected as president, getting me elected as vice president. And so much of our success over the last 7 months is due to his efforts, his staffing, his support, and his friendship. I don't think that I'm alone in saying that Charlie was the smartest political operative I ever met. Everyone knew him as this fearless debater, this guy who would take the conservative message into hostile places and inspire younger generations to have courage. One thing that's hit a lot of those young Americans over the last week was how Charlie was there for them when others were not. When they were afraid to speak their minds, when they were afraid of what a professor would say, when they were afraid that they would be shouted down by their peers, Charlie was there, showing them that they could be courageous and that they could be bold. Charlie was a visionary. He was a luminary. He brought together people. He didn't just teach people how to speak. He didn't just teach people what to say. He didn't just teach people they could actually speak their mind on campus. He created a whole social network for an entire generation of young people. I know people who met their husband, who met their wife, who met the best man at their wedding at a TPUSA event. Because as you guys all know, it's not just about speaking our mind, it's about making friends along the way and creating that support network that won an election and that staffed the current federal government. I owe so much to Charlie. I've had friends reach out in just the last couple of days who sent me messages, screenshots that they exchanged with Charlie in the run-up to me getting selected by the president as his vice presidential running mate. And it's such an honor to have people show me that Charlie said, we want JD to be the VP nominee. And I just had a conversation with the president, and I think things are actually going well. I think he's actually going to choose JD Vance. Do you know what it means to me that such a good guy, such a good friend, such a lion and visionary of our movement was advocating for me? So I wanted to use this show today to advocate for Charlie, to talk about him, to talk about what kind of a guy he was, to talk about what kind of a man he was, what kind of a husband and father he was, and to take people, most of them from inside the administration, but some of them from without, who knew Charlie best, and to talk about what he meant to them, what he meant to this administration, and what he meant to the conservative movement. I was very honored a couple of days ago, on September the 11th, 2025, to fly out to Utah, where Charlie was shot and killed, to meet his wife, to meet his mom and his dad, his sister, all just incredible people who didn't deserve to have this happen to them. And I was also honored to be able to take Charlie's remains from Utah to Arizona. It was an amazing, amazing thing. It was heartbreaking, and it was sad, and it was terrible. But what an honor it was for me and my family to be welcomed in to the Kirk Inner Circle at their moment of